Hi, welcome to this episode of The Daily. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, today I want to briefly explore the question of, are Catholics free to disagree with their Pope? And the answer to that question quite simply is yes, they are, depending, of course, on the context. Now, I think a lot of this arises from a confusion that people have, even Catholics have, some Catholics have, about what papal infallibility means and what the office of the papacy is all about. So first of all, papal infallibility is not conferred upon the man once he becomes Pope. Papal infallibility is something that is tied to the office of the papacy, and it's very narrow actually and tightly prescribed, and there's a specific formula and all sorts of stuff that must be invoked. It can only pertain to matters of faith and morals. So if the Pope got up tomorrow morning and he said that the Brazilian soccer team is a terrible soccer team and no Catholic can ever support it, well, Catholics are actually free to disagree with him on that point. It doesn't pertain to faith or morals. He is not speaking infallibly every time he speaks. Okay, so that's important to understand about papal infallibility. The second thing that people often misunderstand about the Catholic teaching around the papacy is that we don't believe that the Pope is like some divinely appointed emperor, and where everything that the emperor says, every utterance is some sort of expression of the divine. Popes are flawed, fallible human beings like the rest of us, and they can make mistakes. And popes do often make mistakes. There's plenty of examples through the history of the church of popes making mistakes or saying things that were wrong. So popes are not perfect, and they're not going to be infallible. They're not going to be perfect in everything they say. It's not a political office, so it's not like, hey, the new guy has just taken office and he's got a whole new agenda. Instead, the papacy is more about safeguarding a deposit of faith, safeguarding those traditions, working to ensure that unity, to teach and to correct where necessary. But it's about safeguarding something that is entrusted to that man who is called to be Pope. But it's not about like a political agenda where he turns up and he says, right, I've got a whole list of things on my agenda that we're going to do this, and this. Now, he might have items that he believes need to be addressed, and he might go about reforming or doing certain things like that within the church. But the papal office is not a political office in that regard. It's not like the office of a president, where a president comes with a whole lot of his own personal ideological agendas that he brings to the office. A really good example of how to sort of make this distinction, and I think that really sums it up quite beautifully, is the example of Peter and Mary when Christ is taken off to be crucified. Peter, who is the first pope, what does he do? He runs out into the courtyard and then he denies Jesus 3 times. Now, Peter was the first pope, but there's no way those first Christians were called to follow Peter by denying Christ. They were not meant to be doing that. Instead, their call was to follow Mary, who was the first disciple. She's the first to say yes to the gospel. So their call was to follow Mary, who goes to the foot of the cross with the disciple John. So if a pope was to start saying things, so let's say tomorrow the pope woke up and declared that he was going to start a holy war against Australia, and that every Catholic male of fighting age had to report to their local airport, and they were going to be flown at the Vatican's cost to the shores of Australia and armed to fight a war against Australia, you would not be bound to follow that. In fact, you shouldn't follow that at all, okay? Because that would be a gravely immoral thing to do, and you shouldn't be following the Pope. Instead, you should be at the foot of the cross, just like Mary was. So why does this happen? Why is there such a confusion? Well, I think a lot of it's to do with modern technology, actually, because if you think about it, for most of the church's history, apart from the very, very, very early days when the church was smaller, most people very rarely heard from their Pope. When you heard from your Pope, you might get something in writing, a written document every couple of years. That was how you heard from your Pope, right? And for most people, for most of the life of the church, they hadn't actually heard the voice of their Pope. It was only in writing that they had heard from their Pope. But today, things are different. First of all, there's the invention of the wireless, which means radio communications, and all of a sudden Catholics in the last 100 years have regularly become accustomed to hearing the voice of their Pope. And then, of course, we have the development of easy and quick and speedy international travel. And so the Pope could go to places where he'd never been to previously. He could travel the world quite easily, and people connected with their Pope in that way a lot more easily. Then, of course, television media, and finally along comes the internet, and now the Pope, we are hearing from the Pope not just every day, but often once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times a day. Pope Francis has a Twitter account, he has an Instagram account, he is online, there's YouTube videos featuring him now. We hear from the Pope more and more. Now, in one sense, it's great to be able to hear from the Pope more and more, but in another sense, there is a real potential for danger and confusion. because what it can lead Catholics to wrongly assume is that the Pope is more like a political leader, or that everything the Pope says is sort of this infallible statement that must be taken and adhered to with absolute diligence. In actual fact, that's not the Church's teaching. The Pope has said is not like a divine emperor. So in some ways, hearing from the Pope constantly, while in one sense it is a great thing to be able to have that blessing, in another sense it can also lead to confusion and create problems amongst people who start misconstruing or misunderstanding what the actual papal office is and what it is not, and how infallibility when it comes to the papacy is supposed to work and how it's not meant to work. Hopefully that clarifies some questions for people who are interested in this issue. Feel free to chime in with your own comments. Like I said, it's only a brief discussion, and there's plenty more that could be said about this, and really I haven't done due justice to this topic, that you could easily spend hours and hours sitting at the feet of really qualified theologians, hearing them lecture and from a very deep historical, intellectual and philosophical perspective on this really important issue. But thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily.